Well, hello and happy Thursday. Can everyone hear me good? Okay, awesome. Well, I know we have a small group today. It's summer and people have vacations and sports, so I got a couple regrets but people did send along notes. But we'll just dive right in and be respectful of everyone's time. So I have an agenda up here, but you guys know I like to keep it loose. So if you guys want to interrupt me at any point, but I have a couple housekeeping items that I'll go through, and then we'll kind of dive into the discussion again. So I will bring up a little PowerPoint that'll help me go through some of the housekeeping things, because what is a Zoom without a PowerPoint, right? So just a quick reminder, like everyone's here for the right reasons to improve education. We may have difference of opinions, but just be respectful. Everyone's been great, but just have to say it. So the email that I went out on Friday had just a rehash of a lot of resources and links and stuff like that. On there was the share drive. So it's a share drive to your group, but there's also links to everyone else's share drive. So some of the resources are the same across the groups because you guys have talked a lot about the same things, but some of the groups have put different things in there that vary a little bit. So you're welcome to check out the other groups' resources as well. The summary pages went out in the email. They're also on our website, so you can review that, or also the videos. If other people want to check it out or anything like that, all that resources on the website and the email. And this is kind of dive into the new kind of housekeeping items. So the first thing is I'm sending out a survey just to the members of the Budget and Education Working Group to get feedback on how we can improve this group going forward. So this is the first time we did a working group like this in this format. It's the first time I've done something like this, so we just want to get feedback of how hopefully we can continue like something like this in the future. So how to improve it and just get good feedback from you guys, hopefully constructive. The second thing is some of the feedback I got from the different groups was getting more feedback from the broader community. There's obviously a lot of people who signed up for this group, have jumped on the meetings or sent in thoughts and everything like that, but there's obviously tons more people out there that'd be valuable to get their thoughts and opinions on. So I'd really like your guys' input on what type of questions I should include, and what do you think would be the best to like kind of bolster some of the things that you guys have talked about in this group. So for instance, with the special needs group, we may do a question, what are your top priorities or top concerns, special education funding, and list kind of the top 5 things that were mentioned in that group. So I'll be working on that survey over the next 2 weeks. So just keep that in your mind tonight, thinking about questions we can include. And then the request I will have of you guys is that 1, to take that survey, but 2, to push that out to, your school community, neighbors, everything like that. So those are the 2 requests I have you for the survey. So just keep that in your mind now. You can, if you have any ideas during this group, mention it. Also, just over the next 2 weeks, shoot me an email. Even if you don't have something fleshed out and you're just like, I think it'd be good if we got more information in this way, and we could formulate the question together. The other thing is the white paper. So I just kind of like want to go over what I see as the 2 main purposes of the white paper. I think the first purpose is put to everything together for this upcoming legislative session and the upcoming 10-year review, right? To talk about the community's priorities and concerns, and back that with research and data. The second thing I see it is as a longer term kind of project, a living document that will continue to serve as like a conversation starter. And there's a lot of things that have come up in the groups that are not just legislative fixes, but has things that we can come together as a community on and start right away to help just like improve the situation, improve the education around education funding. So that's why I say it's like a living document. It'll continue to be a source of conversation of those are, the priorities we're looking at and going forward. So the white paper, I'm going to be working on it over the next couple of weeks. In mid-August, I will send it out to all the members for you guys to review to see if there's any other things that came to mind, or things I've missed, or things that we can bolster. And then we will likely do a Zoom kind of review at the end of August if anyone wants to jump on and like review the white paper with us. So then the white paper will go to the legislature in September. So I just wanted to kind of review that schedule with you guys. So that's the end of the presentation. Up here, I'm going to put up, we have the May summary, and then the June summary right here. So I can leave this up just kind of as a reference point of things we've discussed further. I know in some of the other groups, what we kind of went into as we dug into some of the previous comments, went into some new things, but also talked about some of the pros and cons of ideas. Some ideas we throw out there, they sound really good, but we started weighing into some of maybe the repercussions that could happen from that. So that was a very interesting discussion, but I am going to stop talking and I would like to turn it over to you guys. One, to see if you had any questions about anything I just reviewed, but two, to see if there's anything, over the last couple of weeks that have really, that you would like to share with the group and discuss further and possibly include in the white paper. Gary, I'm going to call on you because I can see you. So if you had any thoughts or anything.
I had one question about there was a, in the discussion points we had before, there was a mention of that changing the focus on funding from like an A and B, like per student basis into a per teacher basis, which it sounds like that's going to be it sounds like that's going to be looked at fairly closely in this legislative session about the possibilities of, boosting the quality educator payments, and kind of shifting that model around to focus a little bit less on student numbers, because our entire model based on growth is not functioning correctly because none of us have growth anymore. So I was wondering there was a mention of negatives in the summary document, and I may have missed that discussion, but I wasn't sure what the negative repercussions of that were possibly forecast to be. If somebody could clarify that.
I'm forgetting to unmute myself. I have some background noise, so I'm trying to mute myself and unmute myself, so I may forget. Yeah, there was a gentleman last time that raised some issues. I'm forgetting what school district he's from, but he was talking about, under certain, like right now we are under good. Oh, are you here, Mike? Did you? Yeah. Oh, Mike, do you want to actually? You can explain it probably so much better than me summarizing what you said.
Hi, Gary. Yeah, I can speak to that. I've been talking to a couple people about this, Gary, and actually we did kind of a super miniature case study on Helena schools. And I don't mean to brag, you guys, but it's raining here.
Dude, so keep that to yourself.
That's what clean living will do for you.
There you go.
So the issue, Gary, you guys, and I don't have exact numbers, so just work with me here for a second. But if we switch the whole idea of switching the model from a student count driven model to a teacher driven model, there's a couple reasons for it. First of all, the teacher payments completely funded by the state rather than local taxpayers, so that's a benefit, if you will, for a lot of local taxpayers, not all of them, but most of them. And then also that we were looking at some stats today. Montana is like one of the lowest states in the country with under 18 year olds alive. The demographics, there's not very many young people here anymore. Our state is aging quickly, and there's not many kids left anymore. So just like you said, since a lot of schools aren't growing and the state overall isn't growing on an enrollment basis, the premise is to take the focus off of enrollment as the primary funding vehicle and move it to teachers. But as you know, as we look at this and talked about it, like if you think this through, like if there were to be more funding given to schools, that money would promptly be negotiated, in my opinion, into our collective bargaining agreements to attract and retain staff, and that's rightfully so. That's what it's designed for. It's to get teacher pay up and make it easier for schools to recruit and retain. So our budgets would quickly fill up to those levels, mostly again because of salaries and benefits. And then when we get into another budget crunch, which is inevitable, at some point in time, we're not ever going to say, "Oh, we got enough money. We can stop here." That's just not going to happen. So when budget crunches come, like Helena just cut roughly 50 teachers, is my understanding. If each one of those teachers, when you cut them, in Bozeman, a teacher, salaries and benefits, we're looking at about $80,000 per teacher. So, just real rough numbers, that saves those 50 teacher cuts saves $4 million. The problem is that if we go to a teacher-based funding system and each teacher generates $20,000 just for that data point, then cutting 50 teachers is also going to cut $1 million out of your budget. So you got to turn around and cut, I think the math was 67 teachers to get that same $4 million savings if each one of those teachers generates budget cuts. So it's just something to be aware of. Is if there's good thoughts behind it. I really appreciate the thoughts that went behind it, but just, I guess, just a piece of caution that teachers are kind of a variable expense to go along with the number of students we have. And if you take away budget for a teacher, then your cuts are going to have to be deeper. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great, Mike. Thanks for clarifying that. That makes perfect sense. I agree. Yep. I see where you're coming with on that. I see why it makes sense that you would want a mix of those two things to sort of take that. So you wouldn't want it to be all one or all the other, because, you know, the situation that we're in right now, we could definitely use some help on that because of our declining number of students, but you don't want to completely move away from that because, you know, that is at least for us in Helena, it's been a pretty stable number, right? So like we haven't seen a huge declining enrollment. I mean, we lost a fair number of high school students to East Helena, but those were things, you know, those were predictors that we knew were going to happen. Whereas our declining birth rate that's impacting all of us, you know, and like you said, that our state is aging. We just don't have as many people moving in here that have school age kids. So we kind of have to deal with that.
There's an extension of that too for larger districts like yours and mine. And I think Corey's from Columbia Falls. So when you get into the little bit larger districts, you're able to have economies of scale that maybe some of the other smaller schools don't have. And when we went through our budget cuts 2 years ago, we additionally cut maybe more teachers than we needed to make the budget balance because we wanted to negotiate higher salaries for our teachers. We're having a recruitment and retention problem. And so we cut a few more FTE to allow us to give bigger raises. But just once again, if you're cutting teachers and that digs into your budget limits, your spending limits, then that's not an effective tool anymore.
Yeah, that's logical. Well, and I mean, it is interesting how we all, I mean, we're not in identical boats, but we all are to varying degrees feeling the impact of, at least, you know, at the AA level. I don't know from personal experience about the smaller schools, but at the AA level, just that the fact that funding model has had that impact on all of the AAs together, that we're all facing sort of those same fiscal situations to varying degrees, to varying large degrees. It's indicative of the problem for sure.
Look at us talking, Kay. I hope you're happy.
No, when someone can explain their own thoughts, it's much better than me trying to summarize them always. To like kind of build upon something that you mentioned here, was something that a Gary in another group actually brought up, was having more, and this is some people have talked about wanting a more simple funding formula, but at the same time they talked about having more individual maybe sections of the funding formula for AA, for B, for C schools, or taking into account the cost of living in places. Obviously, right, the pro is it may be more responsive to the needs of the community. The cons that things get more complicated. But I think it kind of speaks to some of the issues that you guys were talking about of the needs and how some changes will affect the different size schools.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. Part of the problem with that those base amounts are just that they don't reflect what, I mean, I understand that there's a need for an everybody gets a similar amount sort of situation, but also they just really don't reflect the cost of doing business in a, you know, in an urban area. It's just a reality. You can't function. You have to constrict in such a way that it's hard to continue to meet the educational expectations and needs of your community with that kind of a base situation.
We're obviously in the same boat in Bozeman. Just, you know, average house price is $1 million here. And so you got to pay people more to be able to afford to live here. My question though is, as I think about it, and I think of smaller, more rural schools, they have a recruitment and retention problem too. Not necessarily because of cost of living as such, but more, I don't know how to say this, but like desirability to live, like people, and I don't mean for that to sound wrong, but you know, people want to live in Bozeman. And I think that even though it's cheaper to live in someplace else smaller, they're having a difficulty recruiting and retaining teachers for a different reason. And I don't know if money is the answer. You know, it's obviously kind of cost of living issue here, but would money attract more people to live in some of those places that aren't on the Yellowstone TV show?
That was actually brought up in one of the rural group in particular, and they talked it. So you were blunt, but they were blunt too. It's just like it's hard to convince someone to come move to maybe a town in the middle of nowhere that doesn't have
Yeah.
the stores, the resources, the community, whatever.
Walmart.
So, yeah. So one of the things that the groups brought up was what I kind of hinted at before. It was not necessarily a legislative fix, but they talked about bringing in the community to make that teacher feel welcome. So you could have like retired individuals or whoever it may be, like really embrace that person, bring them to coffee, bring them to breakfast, like bring them to meet people in the community. So you have like a broader kind of welcoming. So it's like, yes, we know you're going to go be a teacher and we want to try to give you all the resources you need to be successful in that job. But then when you leave, you have a personal life and you want to be able to enjoy your time. So that was something of what I was talking about. It's not a legislative fix, but I think it's something that we as community members can come together on and address. But there's probably legislative fixes too. But it was a nice discussion on that. But they admitted those issues too. They also admitted some of the issues with job loss of spouses. So like they may be able to relocate to a more rural area, but their spouse's job is based in Helena, is based in Bozeman, it's based in Billings. So they end up being locked into an area because of their spouse's employment as well. And that was an issue brought up. And also kind of speaking to that, one of the things brought up from some of the rural groups with the smaller schools, I know that's not you guys, but since you brought it up, they mentioned like strengthen the mentorship program with that, from within their own school to other schools. So sometimes those small schools, there's only a handful of people there. So trying to build mentorships and connections to other teachers, other administrators, all of that throughout maybe an area. So they feel more connected and have more people to bounce ideas off of, then all of that, but having more opportunities for them outside just their school.
I don't doubt what you're saying. I just don't have I don't have any knowledge of that. I can make something up. But
It's all feel. I know it's that all that stuff is more like kind of feel good stuff and is not like, oh, let's get down to the nitty gritty. But I thought I would share some of the thoughts that some of the smaller school districts shared.
Well, that's cultural, right? I mean, that's like, I think you're right, though. I think it's right to call out that those aren't really things that you can create a legislative fix for. It's like, it's culturally in the sense that like, we want to be mindful of the fact that there are people who are going to choose all of those types of lifestyles. And I think it's very easy to sort of pit us against each other, right? It happens. I think it happens a lot with Bozeman because it's easy to look at Bozeman and the growth that they've experienced there and the high cost of houses there. It's easy to look at Bozeman and see that's, that doesn't look like rural Montana. And it's like, well, yeah, you're right. It doesn't look like rural Montana, but there's a reason why people are choosing to live there. I mean, Bozeman offers a lot of things that are not offered anywhere else in the state of Montana. So it's not surprising that those things are, that people want to choose to live there. But I think it's all sort of about packaging, right? And respecting the other options. There are also people who, they want to live in a situation where they, have you have that sort of small town feel to it. And, we want to have all those options, but I guess we got to find a culturally respectful spot where we can sort of honor where we were and where we came from with schools over time, but also recognize that we have to evolve and change with what education looks like now and what our communities look like now, because they don't look like they did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Corey, you look like you were about to say something. Not to call you out, but you look prepared.
I have that look, I think, constant wanting to talk. No, it's just interesting that that's brought up about the local and helping each other out because, just coming off the SAM AI conference, we were talking as Northwest Mass about how we can help the smaller districts around us, the K8s, because we're all so close. I mean, you can throw a baseball and hit about 8 districts from my living room, and how we can help each other and in talking more about branching it into the teacher level. It's really easy for me to call up Dr. Barron or Dr. Marshall out of Kyla and have a conversation with them, but we haven't discussed using our teachers to help. So it's interesting that's coming up in conversations.
Speaking of having districts within a stone's throw of each other, I think Mike.
Hey,
you
this
brought
is Dean. Sorry I'm late. I don't know why I had in my head 6 o'clock. So I'll
No,
just figure out where you are and jump in when I'm ready here.
No worries, Dean. Thank you so much for joining on. I know, well, it's summer, so I feel like everyone, I know my head's in a loop sometimes in summertime.
Dean, I told my wife is at 6 too, so you're not alone.
5:30 is a weird starting time. So hey, maybe in the survey, you give me some feedback. Start on out like whole hours, not on half hours. But to build off something that Corey just said, with the stone's throw of districts, and it's something Mike brought up last time, and it's something that has been brought up, I think, in every single group, which I was very surprised about, was consolidation, which I know can be a dirty word, but some of the people talked about consolidation in different forms. So not consolidation necessarily of schools, I think like Mike talked about last time, but consolidation of districts or a sharing of the administrative burden, which when I talked to, they did something like this in South Dakota. And I recently talked to the former head of their former education or Department of Education. And they did something where they didn't get rid of any schools. And they did combine some districts in a way that they were able to share administrative burden, but also share some like of the specialized teachers, music teachers, art teachers, stuff like that. So when the districts came under one, they were able to use those resources a lot easier versus having to deal with, different salary or healthcare or whatever of trying to share a teacher, a specialized teacher between a district or something like that. So I know it's a sensitive topic, but I think it's something that's brought up, and I think people want to at least look it, not one size fits all, but at least look if any of that is possible.
Talking to our board about consolidation and annexation it'd be annexation in our case on Monday night. We can save some neighboring taxpayers about $1,300 a year in property taxes. The staff of those other schools would get 10 to 15% raises. There's a lot of reasons to have those conversations.
Mike, I'd be interested with you on that because that's all new to me in Montana. Wyoming, they all discussed consolidating, but just to remove district administration as their cost savings. I was talking with Marion and Kyla in Smith Valley about they're in discussions now about how they can do that to share resources and tax bases because they can't get anything passed and they need help with facilities and just nothing's moving. But I'd be interested to chat with you at some point. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Give me a call. It's interesting. I did some preliminary looks for Kalispell and the Flathead, and they're the opposite situation. Like Kalispell's got a higher mill. They levy more mills than their surrounding elementary districts, and so those surrounding elementary districts aren't going to vote to join Kalispell and have their taxes go up.
Right.
We're in the opposite situation. Our mills, we got just a lot stronger tax base than our rural, what we call rural elementaries here. So their taxes would go down significantly. And the conversation needs to be had. I just don't think people understand how it works or know the situations.
Yeah, like I haven't even again. I'd have to ask Dustin on this one. Zufalato, he's my man. But
yeah, I know Dustin
on how would that impact with West Glacier or Deer Park? We do Deer Park's food service because they can't.
Right.
So
we do that too.
So
we do that too. They can't. There'd be some staff positions that would go away if we annexed a smaller school, but a lot of those positions are vacant, or they just can't fill them. So some of the positions that would go away, it doesn't have an impact. There would be people that would be impacted directly, human beings. So that's something, obviously a downside of that, but the conversation still, in my opinion, needs to be had. Not that we have to actually go through with the annexation, but we need to know the facts and discuss it.
Looking at it from the perspective I am now, it makes a lot more sense, consolidation, but I can say that when I was principal superintendent in a small district, it would have been occupational suicide for me to even mention that in a small district. It's scary. That's kind of but is defining their township, their location, is their school, and the idea of consolidating is scary. Especially, I mean, if you think about like Ekalaka, way down in southeastern Montana, I mean, who are they going to consolidate with? I mean, the closest one is going to be Baker, which is 36 miles away, and during the winter you can't get there. And now that doesn't necessarily mean they have to consolidate school, but maybe the districts. But yeah, it's just scary discussions in our big state. It's rural.
Yeah, Dean, I agree with that. There's a lot of identity tied around schools with, in towns across the state. That's, everyone in town is at the football game on Friday night, and that's just the lifeblood of the town. And I think I understand that, and I think that needs to 100% be, it's a real thing. It needs to be factored into the conversation when it happens. It's also a different thing when it's just another couple stoplights away in Bozeman. That's just a totally different situation than what you're describing. So both are real, and the impacts are 100% true, and we're not minimizing any of that. It's just still conversation needs to be had, in my opinion.
I think everything you guys are echoing was talked about in the other groups too, where they see the need to look at it, understand the concerns, and understand it's not gonna, if anything was to happen, it's not gonna be a one size fits all. It might work in some areas and not work in others. But like what you said, Mike, it doesn't hurt to look at it. Doesn't mean you have to do it. One thing you mentioned was those open positions, if you combine administration, and one of the other groups, we've talked a lot about teacher retention and recruitment, and every single group has brought that as a priority. You guys have made that a priority as well. But some of the other groups in this past sessions brought up just the recruitment and retention of other support staff too. So the school bus drivers, the cafeteria staff, the clerks, all of that as well, and how we can try to look at that too, and how that also, negatively affects schools when you have all that turnover. We also talked about looking further into the actual cost of recruitment and training new people every time. So there's a cost there too that's a little bit more hidden. Of schools have talked about, you're going to spend a couple $1,000s possibly posting this on Indeed. The cost man hours to go to find a new teacher, a new whatever position. All of that has a cost too. So people were talking about analyzing that. So if you put more money into the salaries or whatever up front, you end up saving a lot more money on the long term of not that recruitment, the retraining, all of that cost.
I also feel like this might be the right spot to add, and Katie, I don't mean to put you in an uncomfortable spot. I know this is your organization and your boss, but I feel like the Office of Public Instruction has, over the last few years, made some moves that I would say have resulted in cost shifting from the Office of Public Instruction to local districts. So, things that we used to be able to count on as resources from the state agency have now, we now have had to absorb some of those costs, both in terms of work that we've had to shift to our staff and other things that I think have just kind of been, transferred that way. So that's something that I think that, I would have added to this list. If those sorts of costs that I think in some cases could be absorbed centrally for all districts are having to be, if we're all having to staff somebody to do something that could be accomplished at the state level, that makes it a bit of a challenge for us. And so I think that contributes to this sort of funding formula question. So I would like to get that in there just as kind of a side note.
I think sorry, go ahead, Dean.
I was just saying, Gary, that's a great way to look at it. Those unfunded mandates.
Yeah, and it's not, I understand that it's all, things that go through transitions, and there's different, different leadership philosophies and different stuff. But it does seem to me like over the last few years, there have been a higher percentage of those type service issues and a reduction in services that were available from the state education agency. So we've struggled with that.
There's some interesting conversations going on too, Gary, and I think it's the leadership's, I think Helen, the leadership's taking it on, just doing a study with the AA's about their central office structure, their central office administrators, if it's one office or two of those types of things. But a lot of people look down on the idea of having administrative positions and central office positions, but there's a lot of economies of scale that, if one person can do this for the district, then you don't have to have people at in our case, 10 buildings doing it separately. So there's savings to be had there, even though people look down on central office type jobs.
They do. I agree. People have and we run really honestly run a pretty small central office staff, but you're right. It
Yeah.
is the perceptual issue with, when you're not working in a building with somebody, they don't see the volume of work that you're doing, even if it's having an impact and saving work for building administrators and teachers. And, I agree those services are important. People don't always see the value of that, but it is critical.
Like we talked about taking our finance secretaries. Do we need a finance secretary to every both of our high schools, or can we just live with one centrally and do the same thing? So those are the conversations that we're having, but then you're adding to central office and all the baggage that goes along with that.
Yeah, we went through that with our tech department. We had, for a long time, we had technology technicians that were at least at our 4 larger buildings. And it was, people really liked that. They really got used to that model, but it really wasn't economical from a standpoint of providing, service or training for those folks when we needed to do that in a centralized way. So consolidating them has made us much more efficient as a technology department in terms of being able to solve a higher volume and be able to help more people when things go wrong. But, there we have gotten some feedback that people do miss having that connection to an in-building person, that they liked the conversations and knowing that there was somebody that they could, just walk in the door and get help from. So you're right. It does. There's definitely both sides of that coin.
Well, Gary, I don't take anything personal. Plus, I've only worked here since March, so you can't blame me for that much.
I hope you didn't imply that I was blaming you, Katie. I know.
I was making a joke. I was making a joke.
I'm not holding you accountable for everything the Office of Public Instruction does. So.
No, I'm from the East Coast originally. Don't judge me. But sometimes I have off-color humor, so I like to make jokes.
I will hold you accountable for that. I went to college in Maine, so I get it. I can excuse that.
My family's from South Dakota, so it's not.
Okay.
My father made a mistake and raised me in New Jersey, but you have to blame me, not my fault.
Okay.
Sorry, Jamie, you were about to say something, but
I was just going to say, I actually have to hop off. I have another meeting at 6, but I just wanted to thank you personally. Gary, frankly, I actually said to someone just today, this Katie at OPI has been great to work with, and I'm really hoping you stay in for the long haul as we continue to work through hopefully the outcome of these meetings. So I just wanted to thank you. I've appreciated the conversations, and I look forward to seeing what the next steps will be.
Well, thanks so much, Jamie. And if you have any thoughts about the survey, shoot them over to me. Otherwise, keep your eye open for the white paper.
Yes, I will be watching for that. It was the survey in that most recent email you sent out then?
I mentioned so the survey, I forgot you weren't here in the beginning.
Sorry, I was late too. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to just do really quickly. I'm building a survey to get more feedback from the community. I want you guys to take it, but I also want your guys' feedback on how to build the questions based on our discussion. So for instance, with special needs, what are your top priorities for special needs education? We'll list 5, and then I'll ask you guys to push that survey out to as many people in your community as possible. So if you have any ideas for questions you think it'd be really important to include in a broader community survey, just let me know.
Okay, we'll do that. Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. But what I was gonna talk about with Dean mentioned was some of the unfunded mandates or underfunded mandates. So some of the groups, and I feel like this is important for the budgeting group too. So some of the groups brought up is there's some underfunded mandates that we can easily identify, like IDEA, and some of that underfunding comes because of the federal requirements and the federal government's level of funding. But we also talked about like other things that aren't always, at least wasn't, I think of IDEA, but I wasn't also thinking about English language learners. There's been an increase of English language learners in our state. We are required to provide certain services for them, but does the money provided by the state allow you to provide all the services that are required? Same thing kind of for gifted and talented. So I know there's a number of things that we can look at as far as like unfunded or underfunded mandates. Any thoughts on unfunded or underfunded mandates? I know, Dean, you mentioned it, so I brought it up, but I kind of hit a couple things.
Yeah, not being in the schools as much anymore. I don't have the exact examples, but the ones you mentioned, like the gifted and talented, and even some of the American education, American Indian education requirements there, um, special ed, IDA, yeah, those types of things is kind of what I was thinking.
And I know some of the groups talked about, obviously there's legislative fixes we could put out there, but we can also ask the legislature to look further into things. So I know there's, like I mentioned before, the cost of recruiting teachers, there is some data out there. But we could always request them to look further into the cost of recruiting a teacher in Montana, and have more specifics, because that does give weight to, like, if it's gonna cost us, $5,000 to recruit the teacher, then it's actually less expensive to put $4,000 more towards their salary, right? So things like that. The other thing that people mentioned was doing a more deep dive into some of those underfunded mandates. Like I mentioned, some of the things we could pick out really easy, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things that some of us are not thinking of or miss, but a better analysis of some of that. Or if you guys have any other ideas of things that, like, ooh, we should look into this further, like the consolidation. Maybe it's not an action item, but it's something that we should look into, consider, study.
I was having a conversation with someone over email, and I could probably find it, but not that quickly. And I'll get the words close, but not right. But the gist of the conversation is that the more an organization is having to deal with scarcity, the closer it gets to not straying at all from its core purpose. So, like, if your core purpose is reading and math skills and you're dealing with scarcity, you're going to have less resources available to put towards MLEL or gifted, especially those types of things. I mean, if you've got those are the types of things that go away in times of scarcity, and you kind of pull back to your core purpose. So I think that's spot on. That's what we're seeing here in Bozeman all the time. Just get back to the very basics core of what you have to do, which is hard because the community expects everything. Like, the gifted and talented parents are vocal, and rightfully so. They want the best for their kids. The sports community wants the best for their kids. Those things aren't the core purpose, when things get tight.
Yeah, that's absolutely been the truth here in Helena too, Mike. I'll echo that. Just to give it a local example for us, it has been our experience that having elementary music and PE certified folks to teach those courses has a direct benefit on student, engagement and accomplishment in those areas. But the reality is that those aren't positions that have to be taught that way. They can be included in your 00 folks. And so, those are things that are on the chopping block when we have scarcity and when we have to have staffing reductions. So, a model that we know works, that we know is beneficial for students, that we know our community supports, there's still nothing we can do about it, because we have to focus on, like Mike said, on the core purpose, and that becomes a sad but a reality for us.
And I know, Mike, you've been so good at bringing us back to reality. So what I'm about to say will cost more money and but you guys talked about last time of having like a per student funding for safety and security allocations. And I compare that to how IFA, you get a per student allocation to provide IFA. But technically you could have if you wanted to, and if you funded it, you could have a per pupil allocation for music, right? For PE, for those things, if the community or the state determines that is something they deem as a priority.
Yes, we have we're fortunate in our voters supported a school safety levy. We've exhausted all of the revenue opportunities that are out there at this point in time. If the legislature were to create a levy specifically for music and PE classes, I would imagine we would pursue that as well. So, we're living within the confines of the state funding formula and the opportunities that we have as decided in Helena.
Clarify that that's not by Helenans necessarily on that, right, Mike?
I thought it was you personally, Gary. Is that not
Yeah,
true?
it's
Did I get
totally
that
me.
wrong? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you're right though, Katie, to call out. I mean, I think technology is a perfect example of that too. Like, we all need a certain degree of technology services. It doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, it's another thing that would be easy to fund on sort of a per pupil basis, right? Like you're going to have student devices. You're going to have network infrastructure to support those devices. All those things can be distilled down into a fairly easy, you know, create a fairly simple and direct formula for distilling what that cost is technology wise. And you could absolutely fund that at the state level for every pupil in Montana. That would be something that you could put into that. I think like safety and security, that would be, you know, it would be easy to do and would provide some relief for districts that have to do that within their general fund confines. Or, you know, some have done it with technology levies, but then you're in the same spot that Mike mentioned earlier. You're asking your local tax base to fund those things. And, you know, some of us have had, you know, we're on a series of good luck, and then now we're sort of struggling with that. So it's definitely an issue for districts to fund those things going forward.
And Katie, you're even referencing like if the reading legislation movement keeps moving like it is, like per cap or per student funding for reading, you know, the state's saying we're pushing that reading proficiency, we're moving that needle up. So you could do per person or per student funding tied to those mandates.
I do say we obviously always being grounded in reality, but technically, you guys can propose whatever you want. You could say like burn the whole thing to the ground and start, but you can also propose things like that, which are smaller chunks, right? Which you do have to find funding for that somewhere. Where is that funding going to come from? But yeah, I think there's justifications for it, like you said. And if the community, the state deems that this thing is very important, every student needs this, then that's a determination that the legislature can make. But suggesting which areas that most be beneficial in is always good.
Yeah.
Some of the other technology things we brought up, and I know this is it's just popped into my head because we were talking about technology, but people did talk about how like how we're addressing technology in schools. Obviously the costs have gone up because the technology is so much more advanced, it's a lot more expensive, but also like the negative effects of technology on students. So people have talked about how it's not really in the budget formula, but it kind of ties in because of all the behavioral issues. Everything kind of ties together. So obviously there's been an increase in behavioral issues in schools, bullying, all of that. So people have talked about how do you limit like technology. Someone proposed like a grant pilot program for like, you know, those bags that they use at concerts and you put your cell phone in it. So that was a proposal that someone brought up, which was a tiny proposal, but also to tie it in, if you guys don't want to talk about that, but tie it into the bigger thing of some of the behavioral issues that tie into the work environment for teachers, but also the costs. I know in big and small schools, if you have a student that's so disruptive that they're taking away the time from the rest of the students, some of the small schools brought up, they don't even have a room where they could safely put that person to separate. But it's also, I know, an issue in the larger schools as well, is how do we address some of the behavioral issues with students that again, may not have IEPs, may not be diagnosed, but there are increasing issues. And I'll put it out there, there is a proposal there was a behavioral health bill passed last session. There was supposed to be a study. There's a proposal that was presented to the legislature this week by DPHHS. It was like a big group that came together. There's 22 proposals. One of the proposals was funding to schools to help with mental health and behavioral health. Because a lot of people raise that that's been an increasing cost. But it's something they need to address. So that is a proposal that is out there currently.
I don't have anything to add for you, Katie. It's an issue. We're looking at that. We're looking at all those things as a local control issue, but as far as statewide mandate or anything like that, I don't know how that would look. So I hear you, but I just don't have anything to add.
The funding that the state's proposing is like it was less of mandates and more of like, here's money to address this. But the proposal is very bare bones, so we'll see how it shapes up, right? It's
What would you
basically,
buy with that? What would you buy with, with this money?
so, well, one thing that Missouri has just done an increased program, so they actually hired behavioral specialists. So they actually hired another person to come in to help address the behavioral needs. So the
Okay,
teacher gets to stay in the classroom and you have a behavioral specialist. So that was one thing other states did.
see, we have behavioral specialists, we're funding those through our safety levy. The safety levy says you can pay for counselors with that, so that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, you might have another funding stream one day for possibly those
That'd be
persons.
great, that'd be great.
Yeah,
We'll make sure
that's
our
the boat
bank
that we're
accounts
in, because
are-
our safety levy didn't pass, so we have to find,
Right.
you know, general fund ways to pay for those things, which is a big issue. So yeah, we absolutely have a need for additional funding in the behavioral mental health sphere. I mean, like, no doubt, like that's a rising cost for us. We hear that from teachers all the time. The behaviors it's not so much that, their behaviors that's been a thing for a long time, right? Even extreme behaviors, but the frequency of them and the number of students that are being impacted by those types of behaviors that are, there's just a lot of, there is more of that. The increased number is a big burden for sure.
Well, it's just something, I guess, because it was a topic on a lot of groups, so I thought you guys might be interested, but just keep an eye out that it's a proposal that's going to the governor's desk next week. But it's a little bit broad, but basically it's funding for school-based mental health services for Montana youth. And so we don't know kind of what will come along with that or what, but there is a proposal out there. So it's just something to keep an eye on.
And I was going to pitch in just really quickly because I'm the tech guy. I'll pitch in that I do think that Mike's right on in his comment about, local control being important when you make decisions like that, and the school board needing to have, to have control over things like that. But I do think that it's really important in the educational spectrum to draw a distinction between, and I'm a tech guy. I love tech, but I think it's important to draw a distinction between, social media and unsupervised use and how that's impacting kids today. But to be clear that isn't, it's not really technology use at school that's at the heart of that particular issue and that mental health impact that we're seeing, particularly in tweens and teens. So you got to keep a fairly distinct line between using technology to, as a component of your education, with, attaining soft skills, getting college and career ready. All those things are critical components of what technology use in schools looks like. It's important to draw a distinction between that and sort of unimpeded social media use, which those are not the same thing and they don't have the same impact. And so you got to be I think you have to be very not discreet, but you got to be very distinct in that conversation to make sure that you're not equating all use of technology all the time, because it isn't the same thing. There's a definite distinction between those things.
Very good point. Very good point.
You're gonna hear that the legislature already funds a major maintenance account, and that major maintenance can be used for buildings or it can be used for school safety, and that includes those counselors. So I think what you're gonna hear from the legislature is they already are funding those things. They compete with each other for sure, but they already are funding those. And my understanding is that's one of the priority areas to get more funding to in the upcoming session is major maintenance, but at the same time, you can use that for school safety and counselors.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there was a lot more to it than I just use that an example of like behavioral health of where something Missouri just expanded, but it's gonna blur out, but there's a report online. So Mike, I can send it to you if you want. So it actually it talks about actually like mental health screenings and stuff like that in schools too. So I know I said it like counselors, but there's much more, they're looking at much broader about mental health services in schools than just saying a counselor. I just use that as an example because Missouri, I think just in the last year did an expansion of that.
The legislature wasn't very friendly to screenings and those types of things in this past session. That was a no-go, and those screenings that we used to do, the Montana Youth Risk Behavior Survey, now got quite a bit more complicated because of those decisions.
There's always discussions, but this one, like this proposal came out of DPE, HHS. So it's just something we're watching because some of it interacts with schools, but we'll see where it goes, right? Being talked about. So we're running a little short on time. We only have a couple more minutes. So I want to make sure, since this is our last like official meeting, that you guys know anything else you think of, or any other information, any other data, anything that you think will be useful to build into the white paper. The white paper is going to be a lot more fleshed out than this. This I literally just put up here as summaries for help us remember what we talked about, or for people who weren't here. So this is very informal. So please just send me anything over the time. But I want to say, is there anything that you guys really want to highlight that we haven't discussed at all, or we want to build out? So kind of this is your last 10 minutes of this type of discussion. So what haven't we hit? We talked about everything? That can't be true. I can keep bringing up things too, but I want to make sure that I'm not just talking about priorities from other people and making you guys talk about them. Make sure that we talk about your priorities too.
Covered it all twice.
Well, I know because this is actually talked about in a committee hearing earlier today, I thought it touches on issues here, but it's housing, not just affordability, but in some of the rural areas, housing might be a little bit more affordable, but there may not be there. So one of the things the legislature is looking at is the cost of living and the housing and rental properties and all of that. So they were looking at models online. So it's something the legislature's continuing to look at, but I thought it was very interesting to look at that in our area, comparing us to the other states, that we have some of the lowest rental availability, the lowest house availability. And as the population has grown, our housing has not kept up with it. So I know that has put a lot of pressure too on schools. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that's something that the legislature is looking at. And there was a pretty interesting hearing, just kind of going over those stats if you guys are interested in that type of thing. But also just see, since it is a topic of discussion in our groups and there, if you guys have any other additional thoughts about just like the cost of living or housing and how that affects education and how that should be also considered in any of our discussions.
A little bit from the other side of it, we've got the 95 mil issue going on and the equalization, those types of things. There might have been a time a long time ago when we were more of an ag-based state, that the value of your property meant you could generate more wealth. And that's no longer the case. Just because your house appreciates doesn't mean your income appreciated as well. And it doesn't mean you've got a greater ability to pay property taxes and subsidize other areas. So I would just throw out that property value is not a good measure of wealth and ability to pay.
And I have no idea where this story lands in any of this conversation. It just was one that I had today. I've got a rock star high school custodian pulling in $18.75 an hour, somewhere around there, $19 an hour. Talked to me about being homeless now, because where he used to park his camper and he chooses to be the RV lifestyle is now going to be rented out, Airbnb, VRBO, that kind of rental, because they can generate more from that. So he came to me talking about, I'm homeless now, and what can we do as a district? Well, obviously we want to keep them. We work through that, but I think that's kind of becoming an issue too. I've got staff members that are losing the lease on their house or their rental because it's being flipped to an Airbnb to move that. So I don't know if there's a way you can study the number of Airbnb and rentals, short-term vacation rentals in a community. But again, I don't know where that story lands, Katie. You can put it wherever, but it was just
No, that ties in a lot actually, because other groups talked about it and another committee talked about it, the revenue committee talked about it, was looking at taxing short-term rentals, those type of VRBOs at a higher rate. So then at the very least, you're collecting more possible revenue for the schools. But something that was brought up too by the other group is like, well, if someone wants to maybe get a tax break from those extra taxes for the VRBO, or maybe your second home, you're not a state resident, you have a second home in Montana, so you have a higher tax rate than someone who lives full-time in Montana. To maybe give them the opportunity for a tax rebate if they provide affordable housing or rent that unit to a teacher for that year. And I thought, as someone who has rented out a house to someone before, I was like, how nice would that be to actually have a teacher rent your place? And someone's got a background check. I mean, there's a lot of benefits besides a tax break to renting your place to a teacher versus someone you don't know, or someone, whatever, someone off the internet. But it was interesting to talk about, one, how to bring in more revenue from those sources to reduce the property tax burden on our residents, but also look at a way to possibly incentivize if there is, because there's some of the short-term rental properties, when they were looking at it, actually are open a lot in Montana. So it seems like they maybe in some areas are able to rent it out for a couple weeks out of the year, but they have a big span where it's not used. So there's just ways to look at possibly, again, gaining more revenue from it, but also incentivizing that those properties are used for housing teachers.
Maury, what did you end up doing without, if you can go into not too much detail, but how did you end up solving this, or did you?
Where the soccer field meets my transportation barn, there's a little back nook that nobody can really see. I said, park your camper back there, and you've got keys to the school anyway, go shower. And hopefully because he's like, maybe something will spring back up after the season, but yeah. We've also
That's a good story.
Yeah.
That's a good story to share.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reverse was true too. He confessed to us that he was sleeping in the boiler room when that cold snap hit in January because his camper couldn't keep up. We're just like, and you got to let us know, like, we're here to help people. And he's like, well, kind of embarrassed, but no. But yeah, we've got some unused property here just sitting here. So my new mission for next year is to have my trades department. We build cabins for the national parks. Like, we're gonna maybe start another class. We're gonna build duplexes on it for teachers and staff. Like, we'll control our own rent. And put some housing on it. We talked about getting rid of, Dustin and I were talking about getting rid of the admin building if our high school bond goes through for remodel, and change it into apartments. Like, we'll have to take control of our own if it's not coming around.
That was talked about in other groups too. So that is like really interesting to know that you're actually looking into doing that. So I may, if other people bring that up again, I might direct them to come chat with you a little bit more and see how you are doing that. But I do know that some schools have used extra space for a teacher apartment. So I know those are creative, at least temporary ways you could try to patch the problem.
Yeah.
Well, we're running down to the last 2 minutes. So final call for anything that you want to say to me over Zoom, knowing that you could call me anytime and email me anytime too.
I have a great idea, but it's going to take longer than 2 minutes.
You could take longer than 2 minutes. It's not a deadline.
No, I don't.
Unless you said it was going to take 2 hours, then I maybe like call me tomorrow. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But well, I just think I want to thank all of you guys for participating and joining, and everyone who's participated via Zoom, via email, via text messages to me, everything. It's been really awesome to get to know a lot of you. I hope I get to meet some of you in person, and some of the other groups I actually got to meet people in person, so it was cool. And I'm in Helena, so Gary, who knows? Maybe I'll run into you.
There we go.
But thank you so much. I know you're taking times out of your personal lives, and you're not gaining anything from it other than trying to improve our community. So I just want to thank you guys for being awesome and selfless and participating. And I will be in contact with you guys. But thanks again, and enjoy your night.
Thank you, Katie. And I'll echo what was said earlier about thank you for doing this. And I realize it is often a challenging chunk of work to do this sort of public reach out, but we really appreciate it. And it's nice to get a chance to have a voice, and you're doing good work. So thank you.
Thank
Hear,
you.
hear.
You guys made it easy. If I had to log in every time I get yelled at all day, then that would make it hard. But you guys were so awesome and constructive in it. So thank you.
Yeah, Katie, well facilitated. Thank you much. And Mike, good luck Monday.
Yeah, thanks. Good times.
Oh yeah.
Great.
Yep. Actually, Mike, shoot me an email. Let me know how that goes. I'll try to check in. But enjoy your night, guys.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye, everybody.